Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Rebecca Katz, welcome to the new school at Commonweal.
Thank you, Michael. So great to be here.
I've been looking forward to this so much. We're here to do what I call a spiritual biography of Rebecca Katz. And what does that really mean? A spiritual biography for me is an exploration of how you came to be who you are. Some of the great questions of life, who are you? Where did you come from? Why are you here? Where are you going? To whom or what are you accountable? Just little questions like that.
Just little ones, yeah.
But let's start in September of 2000. September of 2000, Commonweal Cancer Help Program week, right? Waz Thomas, the coordinator of the Cancer Help Program, called you up. Tell us the story.
Oh, well, talk about seminal moments. I was cooking in a kitchen in Mendocino. I had just graduated from culinary school in New York, and I had been working at this restaurant. I think now it was like on my second year. I called it the pirate ship. It was like working on a pirate ship. Anyway, I was getting ready for service for that night, and I was told I had a phone call. And those were the days when there were like phones. And I grabbed it, and I heard this deep voice. And he said, "Is this Rebecca Katz?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "This is Waz Thomas," in that deep voice, "from the Commonweal Cancer Help Program. I'm the executive director of the Commonweal Cancer Help Program." And I was like, "Oh, I know who you are," So I took the cord, the phone with the cord, and I sat on the back steps, and he said, "Are you busy?" I think it was like the last week of September, because our chef can't make it. And I got your name from Laura Pohl through the Natural Gourmet Institute for Food and Culinary Health in New York, which was my culinary school. And I was like, I'll make myself available. I'm in, right? So I marked myself off the schedule. And I drove out to Commonweal, and I brought all this gear with me. And, I remember sitting and thinking about the menus and thinking about what I was going to do. And this was like a huge, huge deal, because we all knew about Commonweal. Any of us that graduated from my culinary school knew about Commonweal. It was like a coveted place. And the only reason why Waz even reached out to me was because Laura Pohl could vouch for me. Otherwise, no way would I have gotten through the gates. So it was really like super honor. And I arrived on a Saturday, and I had to go to the farmer's market. I had to do all of this preparation, and I was all up in my head, right? Because I'm thinking about menus, and I'm thinking about logistics, and I'm thinking about all of those things and where things are going to go and the flow. And, I had never done a retreat before, let alone for people with cancer. So I was up in the head. So that night, I took myself to downtown Bolinas, to the Coast Cafe, the infamous Coast Cafe. And it was crowded. And I was there with my lists, right? My notes and my lists and everything. And I thought, I'm just going to sit at a cozy table and just do my work, and it'll be really fine. And they seat me at this table, but then they sat this woman at my table, like out of nowhere. I'm like, where am I? Oh, that's right. I'm in Bolinas, California, right? And this woman says, hi, my name is Sugar. And she looked like something out of the Midwest. Like she did not look familiar to these parts, right? And she started asking me questions. And here I am, I'm like, still an East Coast girl, right? I hadn't been in California that long. And I'm like, you mean you want to engage in a conversation? I've got this big retreat and I'm trying to cross-reference my notes. So she orders a burger and fries, and she starts like speaking to me. She was like a shaman slathered in Heinz ketchup, because she starts telling me like, well, you're here for a greater purpose. You can make all the notes that you want, right, in your little notebook, but you're here for a higher purpose. Wow. You're there as a soul nourisher. You're there to nourish people's souls.
Whoa, amazing.
Oh, yeah. This is like...
I haven't heard this story before.
Oh, I've told it before, but truly it's like it's like I'll never forget it. This is when comes from the school of you can't make this shit up, right? Because this was like... Here this woman just dropped in and she gave me the whole purpose. And then she said, you need to leave your ego at the door when you walk into your kitchen. You have to really focus on making people feel nourished. And that was like, okay, list gone. I was like, okay, I get it. Like, obviously, I was so flipped out by that, but it flipped the switch. And I mean, I'm just going to say that's like the story. If I had to say there was like, if you believe in messengers, I've had messengers all through my life and in weird ways. And this was one of those times where it was so clear that I was being called to do something that was not that was above my pay grade, but that was asking me to think about a situation and to rely on the wisdom, something deep inside me that I could access, that I needed to access to be able to do what I was put here to do, that this was next level. This wasn't just getting up a meal. This wasn't about that. This was about something much larger. And indeed, it was. And I'll never forget the first staff meeting. So here I've been isolated from the rest of the staff, and I go to the first staff meeting, and and this is where I meet you and the rest of the staff, and I've met Waz, and we're going around. You were talking about the biographies of each person, and the
biographies of the participants who are coming.
Exactly, yeah. And you're going into their disease states, and you're going into you're really giving people a snapshot, and I am sitting there. Right? Because I'm just the cook, right? And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, how am I going to cook for these people? Because they're ill. And how am I going to do it? And I just remember going to sleep that night being like, oh, wow. And so the next day I walk in the kitchen. I take a deep breath. I leave it all at the door. I'm just cooking from my heart. That's where I'm cooking from. And I just remember getting through that first meal and the smiles on people's faces and just the fact that I was there. My purpose was to hold them like a big, like a cashmere sweater soup, just hold them in cashmere sweater soups, magic mineral broth, and Commonweal tea, just to be that. And the rest is history because it changed my whole life at that point. My life was changed. That was a long answer.
But what better way to start a spiritual biography? So I just want to sugar wherever you are.
Oh,
Bless you.
really?
Bless you, sugar.
Right.
Wow. Sugar. Sugar with a hamburger and French fries at the Coast Cafe, telling you that you were there for a higher purpose.
Yeah.
Check your ego at the door.
You're a soul nourisher.
You are a soul nourisher. What an amazing, amazing story.
Yeah.
So there's so many directions I want to go at once, but I think, well, one thing just to say, 23 years ago, just graduated from Culinary School in New York. By the way, we should mention that Rebecca Laura Pohl, is a very old friend who, as you say, went to the same culinary school. She's an oncology nurse specialist. She works deeply with us to this day. I'm in touch with her several times a week on our Cancer Choices website, and she cooks for the Cancer Help Program at Smith Center for Healing in the Arts in Washington. So the two of you are beloved, longtime partners in the work. There's so many directions to go here, but let's start by introducing you to people. Now, I could do that, but it would be much more interesting if you were to describe yourself. I'll just pick a piece out, which is a quote I saw from you, that you grew up with a spatula in one hand and a paintbrush in the other. Okay? So tell us, for those who don't know, who are you?
Wow. I'm a big person for a little person. I grew up, I was born in Baltimore, Maryland. And I came from a very interesting family. My great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather, came to this country from what is now the Ukraine. He snuck on a boat. This was in 1906 during the pogroms. He arrived in this country with 25 cents in his pocket. He got pickpocketed on the boat. He ended up in Baltimore during the Baltimore fire, sold scrap and metal on the street, and then ended up, I think it was like 20 years later, buying the boat he came in on. So he was a real, and he taught himself how to speak English, and he educated himself, and so I came from that, entrepreneurial spirit that was he was a major force in our family, and he had a big impact on my life. And
did you actually know?
Oh, yes.
You knew him?
Oh, he was, my God. We were partners in crime.
Wow.
He was a huge influence, and I was the great-grandchild. I was his favorite great-grandchild because everybody was afraid of Morris Shapiro.
And because you were like him, right?
I was maybe a little bit.
No, maybe just a little
just
bit.
Just a tit. He recognized me, and I think he recognized me because I was not scared of him. Everybody else was scared of him because he was the big patriarch, right? And I just wasn't. I just got right in his face. And my parents would get the biggest kick because we would go out there every Sunday for dinner. And I remember I made him a stool in nursery school, like just this little wood stool, and I painted it blue. And he said, he comes out to greet me, and I said, "This is for you, Pop." And he goes, "I don't like this color." And I said, "Well, give it back to me. I'll give it to somebody else." I'm like, and then for my sixth birthday, he took me down to the harbor, the inner harbor in Baltimore. And before we went, he gave me a box and he said, "Give this to your mother and go get changed, and we're going to go down to the harbor." And he had a thick Russian accent. He had a thick accent. And it was this little captain's uniform. And I went down to the harbor, and there was one of his tugboats that he named after me called the Becky K. And he said, this was another moment.
Now you're dressed in the little...
I'm in the little captain's uniform. Greg, who is my husband, who is in the audience, has a picture of this. So I have the little navy blue jacket with the epaulets and the captain's hat and a little white skirt, and I'm wearing red PF flyers. Anyway, he said, "Becky, don't forget, you are the captain of your own ship." So here's like this, I got it early, right? I definitely came from a family of cooks and artists. My mother was a painter. My father sculpted. My brother is a photographer. My aunt was a ceramicist. We grew up in art and culture, and I grew up in a family of cooks, for sure. And I started painting when I was 5. At least watercolors. I mean, I did finger painting and everything before, but truly, painting and cooking food was a huge part of our lives because, it was like, I came from a Jewish family, and there was an Italian part that married in. So there was this, food was the center of everything. And my father would say, "Eat, then we'll talk about it. Eat, then worry,"
So what did your father do with himself?
Oh my gosh. So my dad was in the food business. And he was an entrepreneur. And when he was 27, he bought one of the oldest tea importers in the country. It's this little company called Martin Gillette and Company. And they made tea. And then they also made mayonnaise on the side. Well, he ended up really taking the business in the condiment, in mayonnaises and salad dressings and everything else. So basically, we grew up, with him bringing in the latest salad dressing, the latest mayonnaise, and he was very successful at it.
Wonderful.
So we grew up in like the food world.
And what about your mother?
My mother was she was an artist, she was a painter, and then she kind of put down her paintbrush in her 30s. And then she became very much interested in philanthropy and in history. And she was the first female president of the Maryland Historical Society, and the first Jewish, was the first woman and the first Jewish person of the Maryland Historical Society. So she really devoted her time towards that. My father got back into his painting, into his art, later in his life, in his late 60s. So, yeah, that was a very rich
And did you have siblings?
Yeah, I do. My brother is a photographer. My sister was an incredible jewelry maker. And now then she switched and got her degree in education and working with children who are gifted and talented.
And where were you in the sequence?
I was the youngest.
You were the youngest.
Yes, I was the youngest.
And the beloved youngest great-granddaughter of the patriarch.
Yeah, the patriarch of the family.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and say again what city you were in?
Baltimore, Maryland.
Baltimore. So, what were you like in 8th grade?
Oh, God. 8th grade. Only the most awkward year ever. So one of the things that my parents did is they knew I needed an outlet. So they enrolled me in a young children's theater workshop. So I became a thespian at a young age.
How old?
Oh, well, I'm going to say easily, it was like 9. And I had a very low voice for a little person. And I used to imitate Ethel Merman. And so I would like break out into song, right? Like I would imitate Barbara Streisand in Hello, Dolly. And I would just, and so I was in all these musicals, right? And it was kids, right? And I had the big belty voice. So I used to sing both parts because I had this low voice. So anyway, in 8th grade, the greatest thing about being in theater is that it keeps you out of trouble. And it kept me out of trouble, and it gave me a tremendous focus. So in 8th grade, I was very involved in theater, and because I had a voice and I could dance, I kind of was in the high school musicals, even though I was
in 8th grade.
In 8th grade. So I was hybrid, and also I painted. So I sort of kind of skipped a little bit of the awkwardness because when you have theater as your platform, you can sort of transcend a little bit.
And so here you are, this compact bundle of energy, right? Right. This compact bundle of energy. You said, you kind of said a big person in a small package.
Right.
Yeah. So this compact bundle of energy. Your parents were wise enough to realize you needed an outlet. They enrolled you in the theater school, and you had this big, low voice and just could do Barbara Streisand and could sing both parts. So I can visualize it. So was there a big production in 8th grade that you starred in?
Well, I didn't star. In 8th grade, I was lucky to be in the chorus.
Oh, because you were...
Because I was getting in under the radar.
Oh, but you're in the high school thing.
Oh, yeah. So I was in the high school musical, but I was in the chorus.
In the chorus. I get it.
I peaked.
Yeah.
In 11th grade.
In 11th grade.
I starred as Adelaide in Guys and Dolls.
Oh, really?
This was peak. This was the peak of my theatrical career. And then I went on to Northwestern University as a theater major.
Before you started.
Yes.
When you see a guy reach for stars in the sky, you can bet that he's doing it for some doll. When you see a gent and he's out in the rain, you can bet that gent is there for some dame. So on.
Yes.
Yes. Can you sing a piece from it?
Oh my God. Okay. Let me see. A person can develop a cold. You can feed her all day with the vitamin A and the bromo fizz. but the medicine will never get anywhere where the trouble lives.
Beautiful. I love it. I love it. You know, my wife calls me the human jukebox.
Oh, my.
Because we've been married for 40 years, and I keep singing songs she's never heard me say before. I'll tell you what it is, because my grandfather, Benjamin, came over from the Polish-Jewish frontier with my father in 1906, the same year that your great-grandfather came over. And we came from a line of Torah scholars. That's what we came from. Lerner was a made-up name because the Russian authorities would go into the Jewish villages and they'd take any sons they'd leave each family one son. And so the Jews in the shtetl figured this out. So they would make up families with two older people who didn't have a child, and they'd put a child in it. So one of those families was named Lerner, which meant scholar, because this line were people who, they weren't rabbis, but when the rabbi wasn't the visiting rabbi wasn't in the shtetl, my great-great-grandparents and so on fathers would do the services and so on. So anyway, I should have been a Torah student, but growing up in an agnostic Christian Jewish family, all that energy of memorizing the Torah went into picking up the lyrics of 10,000 songs.
Oh my God.
So my entire capacity, which should have gone to studying Torah, went to 10,000 songs, and constantly in the course of a day, somebody will say something and boom, it triggers one of these 10,000 songs. So Cheryl will say to me, she just said to me the other night, that's a new one.
You have a deep catalog.
I do have a deep catalog. And what a waste. I mean, what an incredible waste that if I had been given something to study that was worthwhile, I would have made something of myself, and instead I memorized 10,000 popular songs, anyway. So, okay, so in 8th grade, you were in the chorus in the high school production. In 11th grade, you peaked in Guys and Dolls.
Right.
All right. So what were you like as a senior in high school?
Senior in high school, then I became involved. I still was a major theater person, and I was still, at that point, I'm doing community theater. I've graduated from kind of, I did the high school musical, and but I moved on to community theater. Mm-hmm. That was the next step up. And
did you expect you would be an actress?
Oh, my dream was to be a star on Broadway. That was it. Mm-hmm. And I remember I went to a program at Northwestern University in between my junior and senior years that summer to study theater. And because I wanted to go to Northwestern. That was my school. Mm-hmm. So my senior year was devoted really to trying to get in to college. Mm-hmm. And also it was a year of I was very engaged in my art, in my painting. So,
which was going alongside
my theater. I'm still one of my favorite people ever is my high school art teacher who I just talked to last week. Wow. Nancy Patz. She's 93 and one of my favorite people on the planet. So, and a huge influence. So, and I was very, I went to this very bohemian prep school. When I say...
what was it called?
It was called the Park School. Mm-hmm. And it was very bohemian for Baltimore, Maryland. Mm-hmm. And so I was involved in working with kids in the city, and just I was involved in a lot of different volunteer efforts, and we, my friends and I we were very active, very active in the community. And
what was your painting like at that point? What were you painting?
Well, I was strictly at that point a watercolor painter, and at that point I was painting still lifes, and I was painting people, and I was very representational kind of painting.
Were you skilled at representational art?
I was at that time. If I looked at my art back then, because it was very studied, and I was learning technique, it was, I would say, I would look at that work and say it was a little tight, because I don't paint like that now. So
you were doing this very representational art. You were, you wanted to be a star on Broadway.
Right.
You were in community theater.
Right.
You were doing service work with kids in the community. It was a bohemian prep school.
Right.
Who was the human being inside all of these external experiences? What was going on inside you?
Yeah. Wow. I look back at that young woman who thought she needed to have it all. She thought she needed to have it all figured out. It was like, that was a big thing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. This is what I'm going to do. It was a very anxious, young woman coming into, just on the verge, who thought it was going to write a story. She was writing a story. This was the script, right? And she was going to sing and dance her way in. And she was going to take all that energy and just
drive it through.
Yeah. And she's going to be controlling everything. I look back on that, and I, of course, now I'm 62, and I'm like, wow, boy, did things shift, But I think I had exuberance, I was very, very sensitive, and I think it was hard being sensitive in my family because, it just wasn't. It was like sometimes people would say, you're entirely too sensitive. So I think I had, the theater was a way for me to sort of mask that sensitivity, or I could channel it.
Sensitive in what way? What was the inner experience of the sensitivity? Would you get easily hurt when people said things?
I would get easily hurt, or I would feel very empathetic towards other people. And I think I was a little, and I didn't know what to do with some of that. So I felt things very deeply that were happening in the world. And I just didn't know what to do with it all.
So you said you've been visited by spirit entities or something throughout your life. Messengers is what you said?
Yes.
Were these messengers human beings like your art teacher, or were they also energies that didn't come in human form?
I'm going to say that in my experience, they always came in a human form, but very unexpected, from unexpected, like a sugar, or or maybe a teacher, or somebody out of the blue that I didn't even know that might step in for maybe a cameo appearance of 5 minutes.
So if you look back who are some of the earliest or earlier guides or beings like that come to your mind?
Well, I definitely think moments with my great-grandfather, most certainly. Definitely with my art teacher. I would say I had some very profound moments with my father, where he would sort of provide me with the answer to a quiz, you know, like a pearl of wisdom that would come through him out of nowhere that seemed to be like just the thing I was ready to hear at the moment I was ready to hear it. I had an extraordinary relationship with him in that regard. There was just that type of connection. It wasn't necessarily, I didn't get a dose every day, but these little like pearls would come.
What was
out of
family
nowhere.
life like in your family? You said you were sometimes told you were too sensitive, but was it one great happy family where nobody had any problems with anybody else?
Oh, no.
Or
It was...
Was it more like the rest of us?
It was the rest of it. It was a very challenging dynamic. It was challenging on every different level you can imagine. So it was, it was like everybody else. And
as the youngest, did that have a special impact on you?
yeah, it did.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm very close to my brother, and you know, we kind of have talked about like what it was like growing up in the type of family that we grew up in, and how it affected us differently.
And what do you say to each other?
We're like, wow. I can't believe we're still here and talking about it. Wow, this is a big question. I think we both feel at this stage in our lives that we feel now a tremendous amount of freedom that we did not experience growing up in the framework of our family structure. That with the passing of our mother, that there was, that we experienced this freedom to be ourselves and not what we were quote unquote expected to be, or being second guessed, or lots of those kinds of things that we grow up with.
So many of us have had challenging families, but it sounds like the family situation was challenging. You were an extremely sensitive person, but in school and in theater, you were able to break out and achieve and really shine.
Right. But that was in high school, not in college.
So what happened in college?
So I did get into Northwestern University, and I think my college years, that was the beginning of the wake-up call. Like, you know, now you're not in a little pond.
What year are we talking about?
Freshman year.
Yeah, but what year was that?
That was 1979,
All right.
80. And now I'm in a bigger
Pond.
And these are people that, you know, I'm in the theater department, and Northwestern had quite a rigorous theater program. And basically, you were not going to even be in a show. You were going to be doing crew most of your freshman year.
Yeah.
And I should also say that I had a learning disability in school.
Which kind?
I'm going to say a little bit of dyslexia, but also I was a visual learner, and most of the learning was, audio driven, which I don't learn as well. I'm a visual learner, and I wasn't a great tester. So I had to study 10 times harder than anybody else. And so now I'm in college, and I'm faced with really long hours of theater crew, the challenges of what it means to be with this very eclectic, dramatic group of people. I mean, and also having to get my academic chops going. And it was like, wake up! You're not in Guys and Dolls anymore. You're not in that world. And I found my niche because I painting sets. So my crew, I was lucky because, I got to paint these 20-foot by 40-foot backdrops and flats, and
your paintings now are also immense.
Right, and they were huge.
Yeah.
And so that was like my savior. And I struggled through theater school. I struggled immensely. I got a lot of rejections. I think I got cast in one thing the whole time I was in college. And I think by junior year, I decided, you know what, this theater thing, I don't think it's for me. I mean, it was great in high school, but I don't think I can do this. I think I want to do too many other things. Not that I know what those are, but I didn't feel like I could be, but I was too afraid to come out and say, you know what, Mom, Dad, I don't want to do this. Somehow I felt like I would be a big failure. But
it sounds quite devastating.
At the time, it was, because I was unmoored. For the first time, I discovered, wow, you know what, this life thing, it's like uncharted territory. And you know what, I don't know. And all my friends from high school were going to law school and graduate school and medical school. And I felt like they had it all dialed in. And I just was I'm not sure what it is.
Given who you were as a senior in high school.
Yeah.
Just all planned, going to drive it through. And then junior in college, it's not working. You don't want to say to Mom and Dad, this isn't it.
Yeah. And my senior year, I had my first big depressive episode. I really went into a deep depression. It was my first real experience. I mean, I've dealt with depression on and off my whole life, but this was a big deal. And anxiety. And it was, I didn't have the tools at that point to deal with it. And I got through my senior year, and the one program I did get into, even though I knew I wasn't going to be, a Broadway star, was an opportunity to study at the American Conservatory Theater, their summer Congress program in San Francisco. And that was an amazing experience because that was my first taste of peeling away the layers and understanding, having some key into self-awareness through breath work, through rebirthing, which was a big thing at the time, through all of these more kind of holistic spiritual approaches, yoga, things that were not about outward, but were inward. So it was like that was my first taste of that.
You know, depression is such an interesting thing because obviously in some people's cases it's essentially a biochemical thing. But in archetypal psychology, you may or may not know this, but in a lot of archetypal psychology, depression is seen as an immensely fertile space in which all kinds of realizations emerge. And you mentioned that you have dealt with depression throughout your life. What has your experience, I mean, has it been like a biochemical thing that comes and goes, or has it been a source of insight and learning and even transformation that takes place for some people?
I will say that it is a combination of both. Biochemical, our family had,
Has it?
yeah, all through.
Right.
So definitely biochemical, but I will say that I've always come out of my depressions with greater knowledge. Like, I'm going to say I was pushed to another level. I was because the only way out is through. That was my experience. That is my experience with dealing either with depression or anxiety or chronic pain or any of those things, is to find a presence with it.
Yeah. I mean, I've dealt with anxiety at different points in my life, and, you know, the thing about anxiety is that it's kind of whatever, fear or anger without an object. And once I understood what it was that I needed to do that I'd been avoiding, and I actually did it, the anxiety just disappeared, you know. And so it seems to me depression and anxiety are like other wounds that, you know, the wound is not only a wound, it's an opening. And so when you say each time you've come out and been taken to another level, I can really resonate to that.
Yeah.
So what was the new level that you were taken to after this major depression as a senior in college?
I moved to New York. And I got my first job cocktail waitressing on Track 34 in Grand Central Station. I remember calling my parents, and I've got both my parents on the phone. Now, my father is absolutely thrilled because I went out and got a job, and I was happy about it. My mother was like, "Oh my God, Jay, you've got to do something about this."
What did she call you?
She was talking to my father on the phone.
Oh, I see.
It's like, she's like, "Oh my God." And then she says to my father, because they're both on the line together, "Jay," that's my father saying, "you've got to do something about this." And my father was like, "No way. She is on her way," right? And I graduated from cocktail waitressing to waiting on tables at a very upscale bistro on the Upper East Side. And then this is like, and I waited tables all through college. And
was that because you needed the money?
no, it wasn't that I needed it. I wanted to earn my money.
Yeah, got it.
So I waited on tables. I did pretty well. Anyway, this is just kind of a precursor.
What did you learn from waiting on tables?
How to work with the back of the house.
Well, right.
Okay, so I look back now at like all the things that I did, right? Waiting on tables. My first job when I was 16, working at the Roy Rogers on Park Heights Avenue, having to wear a cowboy hat and say "Howdy, partner" and "Happy Trails," and waiting tables in college, and then working at a summer resort in Maine, which was like my Dirty Dancing summer, and working in that big kitchen environment, and then
Now, wait a minute. We got to go to that Dirty Dancing summer. What was that all about?
God, okay. So the summer after my freshman year, I get cast. I wasn't cast in anything in college, but I end up being cast in things outside of school. So this was sort of like, it was in Maine. It was this kind of family resort in Maine. It could have been in the Catskills.
Was it a Jewish family resort?
It wasn't all Jewish, but it was
Jewish.
Right? It was low fat Jew. So like low fat Jew. Okay, so it was on Kezar Lake in Lovell, Maine. Beautiful area, and I was hired to wait tables, and then at night we would do these cabarets, and so I all of us would switch, and these were amazing musical theater or musicians from all over the country. So anyway, here we were, and this was like the serious waiting on tables. This was like, those big trays, you had to and this is like carrying the plates up and down your arms, and you had the family the whole time they were there. And it's where I met my first serious boyfriend, whose name was John Q. Smith.
John Q. Smith.
Not a nice Jewish. He wasn't a Jewish boy, but he was a very nice boy. Anyway, so it was that rich summer. But the chef was a French chef, because what these resorts did was they went and they got all these great chefs from the Boston area that wanted to take time off and work in Maine, where it was like nice. So you'd get, chefs from the Ritz and all these other places. So here we are. I'm like, here's my painting again. I would sit on the beach and I would do these pastoral watercolors, and people would ask if they could buy them. And so I sold my paintings, and then the chef gets wind of it and says, would you please paint?
You speak French?
No.
Okay.
But he spoke English, but he was French. And he said, would you paint my turkeys and ham for the Sunday buffets? Because this is when they would do the gelatins over the hams, right?
Yeah.
So I would go in with these non-toxic paints and do these pastoral Maine lake scenes,
on the hams.
On the hams and the turkeys. So you have to laugh when you think that now, I'm a trained chef and a painter, right? And from my earliest days, right, I'm painting on food.
And also the fact that you were waiting on tables. You were around food.
All the time.
So you were around food in one realm or another, and your art is going on at the same time.
Yeah, and I learned so much by understanding the back of the house and how chefs work and how food was prepared. And, I had that whole thing. I had it all. I had the sauce going on. This was like, I couldn't have written the story of how things sort of happened.
So what was the next? So you've got these jobs in New York. What was the next big point in your
next big point
trajectory?
Was so I'm in New York. I'm getting all these odd jobs. I finally came clean to my parents and said, "Oh, by the way, I am not going to be a star on Broadway, and I'm not interested in making, in auditioning and being in the theater as my life practice. And the big admission was, and you know what? I just don't know. I don't know what it's going to be. But I'm working and I'll figure it out. Now, my father totally believed I was going to figure it out. It was like my mother, she just had a lot of anxiety, and it was more, she just was like, she would second guess everything. But my father pretty much figured, she's got spirit and she will figure it out. So I did a lot of things in New York. I was a fashion stylist. I worked in a public relations firm. I ended up working in marketing communications for like 9 years.
But all these things contribute to what you've done.
Absolutely.
Marketing and communications stylist, the food stuff, understanding the back of the house.
Yep. The theater stuff, because...
The theater stuff, of course. You're a performer.
Yeah. I mean, do a demo, do a food demonstration, and you've got to talk and cook at the same time and look in a camera. And I think my stars for my theater training at Northwestern University, even though it was very difficult. But yeah, you just can't. I look back and I go, I could never have scripted this story. The next point, I think, that's important to my story is I went through a health crisis when I was 29 years old. And that was, I think, one of the biggest wake-up calls of my life. And it put me, I had severe endometriosis. And I had it my whole life, but it was never diagnosed. And by that time, it had literally crippled me with pain. Like I couldn't really do anything, and nobody knew what it was. And what's so odd is that it's a disease that affects 1 in 9 women, and yet it's still the most misdiagnosed and misunderstood. One of women's health issues that is just kind of
it's pandemic.
It is. And I was thrown into my world was turned upside down, and I was working. I was a workaholic, so I just tried to work my way through the pain. Anyway, it was a very difficult time and a very dark time. And I ended up having a hysterectomy at the age of 32. So I say this because that was, when you go through that type of dark, inky time, when you are embroiled in pain, for me, and of course that led to depression, it really, there's a wounding that happens. It was like a deep wounding. I felt like my body was betraying me and I had no control. But again, the only way out was through it. And there was something in me that kept saying, this is not going to define your life. This, what you're going through now, is not going to define your life. You will get to the other side. You will get there. And I don't know where that came from. You know, it's because, believe me, people weren't telling me that. But something in there, something. And so maybe it was a higher source or something that was telling me I was going to get through this time. And I mean, 6 surgeries later and a hysterectomy, but I still was left in chronic pain. So it wasn't really until I was 59 that I got out of chronic pain. So I feel like that's a part of my spiritual biography, that I always had this level of chronic pain that I was dealing with as I was moving in all these.
From 29 to 59.
Yeah.
30 years of chronic pain.
Yeah.
It's a lot of years.
So astrologically, it's like one Saturn return to the other Saturn return.
Aha.
Interesting.
Yes, that's very interesting.
You know? So that was kind of an undercurrent.
Oh.
And Rachel Naomi Remens would say, a wounded healer. So
Absolutely.
that, going through that actually is what made me get to my next big turning point at 35, when I took a life sabbatical and I went to Italy.
Well, let's take a break right there just to give ourselves just a little pause here.
Don't take it, don't. 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 Don't take it, don't.
The river is a healer. The river is a sage. The river knows no end, and the river feels no way.